to On the Air presented by AIRWAAV. I'm your host, Sydney Smith, and I'm here with Dr. Charles Allen, who has done a ton of schooling in the field of exercise science, including earning a PhD. Dr. Allen has conducted a bat speed study showing how beneficial AIRWAAV can be for performance. I guess to kick things off, obviously you have a lot of expertise in the field, so can you share about your background, how you got started in the field of kinesiology and strength and conditioning?
Sure. I started out at Coastal Carolina University as an undergrad. My major there was physical education, with emphasis on being a teacher. So my goal at that time, at least as far ahead as I could foresee, was to be a PE teacher and a baseball coach. I was a baseball athlete in high school. Absolutely loved the game. And wanted to stay a part of the game for as long as possible. Had the opportunity to attend grad school at the University of Mississippi and have that paid for. I had a graduate assistantship in the exercise science program there, which is where I kind of got exposed to more of the science side of fitness and not just physical education in terms of, skill development and sports skill practice and things of that nature. Really enjoyed my time there. Again, I got kind of sidetracked, I guess, or my path is nonlinear, I would say. I got highly involved in recreation and campus recreation, and the folks that work out there, had made the best friends of my life in the rec center at Ole Miss, and got into campus rec as a career path. My first professional job was at the University of Tampa as fitness coordinator. Ended up back at Ole Miss as fitness coordinator for campus rec there. But being on a university campus, I was kind of exposed to and had the opportunity to be involved in some strength conditioning stuff for various athletic teams. At Ole Miss, there was some guys on the football team that, would come into our facility, and I'd have the opportunity to interact with them and, make some suggestions and things of that nature. When I was at the University of Tampa, again, there wasn't a strength conditioning professional that was an employee of the university at the time. Some of the teams were contracting out, doing some one-on-one strength conditioning stuff. And so I had the opportunity to kind of be a part of that as well, with, women's volleyball, the baseball team there. Again, very ancillary, but working with the coaches that were facilitating those strength conditioning sessions there. In 2015, I ended up here at Florida Southern College as a professor. So while at Ole Miss, I was working full time, but I was pursuing my PhD part time. Finished that up in 2015 and ended up here at Florida Southern as a faculty member in the exercise science program. At that time, the NCAA had not mandated that all strength conditioning practices be supervised by CSCS certified or CSCCA certified individuals. So there was no strength coach here. So being that we were the closest to the experts that our athletic staff had, we facilitated some strength conditioning sessions for various teams. In 2016, the NCAA passed that rule, and Florida Southern hired its first strength coach. And he and I were, best friends. We saw things the same way. We had similar philosophies. So he invited me in during my spare time to be a part of the strength conditioning program, what he was doing with all of our teams here. So I've worked with, again, volleyball, women's soccer, our water ski team here, and various other teams, just kind of around my schedule as a professor. So whenever I had time and could be over in the weight room, whatever team was in there was the team that I was helping out with and coaching up. So like I said, I think my path is a little bit non-linear. I haven't always been directly in strength conditioning, but I've always been around strength conditioning. And from an educational side of things, I've always tried to teach other people all of the things that I've gained from being around those professionals. So
you have worked in a variety of different sports across the various different schools that you've been at, and still working with a lot of different type of athletes now. What does your current work look like now, and what areas would you say that you might specialize in?
Yeah, so I'm trained as a PhD in biomechanics specifically. So kind of physics as it applies to human movement. Uh, by nature, I would consider myself a generalist. I do have a line of interest that has kind of always been this mouthpiece stuff, or this thing that's referred to as concurrent activation potentiation. That's been the pursuit that I've had for the longest time. But I'm generally interested in anything that can help uh, human performance, right? So I've explored the tactical side of things. I have certifications through the NSCA for tactical strength conditioning. I'm also a certified performance and sports scientist. So I really like marrying all of my interests together, right? So the research on the academic side, I really like the data and utilizing data to inform decision making in the strength conditioning practice. Um, so again, expertise. Yeah, I've got a terminal degree. I have a hard time saying that I'm an expert in any one thing. I consider myself a generalist. And I think, I just do my best to help people, and I'm well aware of my limits. If there's something I don't know, I don't have a hard time saying I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Well, you clearly have a lot of knowledge and passion for performance in general, and you've done a lot of fascinating work around the concept of CAP. And I listened to your presentation that you gave to the board. And so, for some of our listeners who may not be familiar to what that is, how would you describe CAP?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in the literature, it's defined as some sort of simultaneous muscle activation that is remote or not involved in the activity of interest, right? So a simple example would be if you're executing a vertical jump, we know, generally speaking, the musculature that's involved in that, the hip extensors, knee extensors, ankle plantar flexors, and there's a coordinated effort there to have those muscle actions occur in a specific way to propel us as high as possible off the ground, right? Well, if you clench your jaw while doing that, technically you're activating muscles that are not involved in that activity simultaneously at the same time as those muscles that are facilitating the activity. And so that's the idea of concurrent activation. You're activating multiple muscle groups, some for the purposes of executing your skill or movement of interest, and others for the purpose of potentiating those muscles, right? So the idea is that this remote muscle activation or remote voluntary contraction in some way enhances the muscular performance of the muscles that are involved in the movement that you're interested in, right? So again, if it's vertical jump, if I clench my jaw at the same time as I'm executing the jump, the activation of that jaw musculature in some way enhances the muscular force output or the rate of force development or some other force characteristic that is involved in that activity, which then hopefully ultimately leads to better performance.
What are some common examples of CAP in action that people might already be doing without even realizing it?
Yeah, I think clenching the jaw or creating tension in the face when exerting maximal force is pretty common. Anecdotally, I've seen that discussed, and there's examples of that throughout history, right? Roman soldiers were given sticks to bite on and things like that when they were going through triage on the battlefield. The famous term or the cliche term, bite the bullet. The idea there is you're biting down on something, and that helps you deal with pain tolerance. Again, generally during war and triage activities like that. I think anytime someone is giving a maximal effort, like a deadlift or a squat, you often see this tension created in the face, right? There's the musculature of the face is activated, um, clenching of the jaw, those types of things that a lot of people do that naturally. And I think that is kind of how the phenomenon of CAP came about. Somebody recognized that hey, this thing is happening. Why does it happen? Is there any benefit to it? Why are people doing these things? And started to investigate. And generally, what we see is with this remote muscle activation, there is some performance enhancement in some way. Most of the research is based on isometric muscle actions or maximal force production, but there's some stuff out there too with explosive activities like vertical jump and things of that nature. And some of the stuff I've done with, baseball and bat swing velocity and stuff like that, there does seem to be some tangible gain in, various elements of performance, right? Just because bat swing velocity is faster, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a hit or hit the baseball or softball safely. But it does increase your chances, right? So if a ball you hit leaves the bat at a faster velocity, it has a greater opportunity to get through the infield, get past the defenders, or if it's a ball that's in the air, maybe it travels a little bit farther because it has a greater initial velocity, things like that, right? So there's no guarantee of better performance, but when we're measuring force production and velocity and things of that nature, there does seem to be some benefit to doing that.
Yeah. And to your point, this is not a new concept because, as you were saying, we've seen it in history, but then also we commonly see it in weightlifting. And I think it's cool to recognize that. And obviously, I think a lot of people don't know the reasoning as to why that they might be doing that. But then also, how can you apply that type of science to other sports like baseball, softball, golf, whatever it is? So yeah, I guess you've recently led a study using the AIRWAAV mouthpiece with baseball and softball players. So can you tell a little bit about that study and what the objective was and how you really set it up?
Yeah. So the most recent study kind of came about as a result of a previous study that I did with one of my former undergraduate students here at Florida Southern. She was a softball athlete and just an all-around outstanding student and wanted to be involved in research of some kind. And I was studying this line of concurrent activation potentiation stuff. And I was at a point where, again, most of the literature at that time was demonstrating the benefits of CAP with very controlled measures within a laboratory setting, right? Isometric muscle force production and things like that. And so there were some critics of the field that were like, yeah, this is interesting, but how does it apply in a sports setting, right? Does it actually work when there's a dynamic muscle action or when there's a more complex activity rather than just, say, a grip strength assessment or a maximum isometric clean pull movement pattern, right? So I was trying to figure out what I could do to kind of demonstrate legitimate sports performance benefit rather than just continuing to show increased muscle force capacity. And the idea came around about measuring bat swing velocity. At the time, velocity-based training and measuring velocity outcomes in the resistance training field is really taking off. But things like measuring bat swing velocity in sport performance was also kind of taking off. It was around about the time that ESPN was starting to show exit velocity on balls hit in games and stuff like that. So long story short, I recruited my student. She recruited her teammates. We designed a study where we would have them take some swings at balls off of a tee under different conditions, jaw clenched, jaw relaxed. We had gave them 5 maximal effort swings at balls off of a tee. We measured bat swing velocity using a sensor that attaches to the handle of the bat. We we designed it as well as we could from a standpoint of we wanted it to have some practical relevance, but also have enough controls to where we could actually attribute any changes in velocity that we saw to the concurrent activation potentiation achieved by jaw clenching. And again, so what we did, once we got the data, we averaged the numbers across all the swings. And what we saw was when these athletes clenched their jaw as they were initiating the swing to contact the ball off the tee, on average, there was about a 3 mile per hour increase in bat swing velocity. Okay. And that's important, again, because the faster the bat swings, the greater the potential exit velocity of the ball, which increases the chance of a ball that's batted fairly to lead to a successful on-base hit, right? So it gets past the infield, it travels a little farther in the outfield, so maybe a fly ball that would have been an out now carries over the fence. So it was pretty interesting and an opportunity, again, to demonstrate that there's real applicability here if people want to take advantage of it. So from that study, I was contacted by some of the folks at AIRWAAV, and they're like, hey, we have this product. We really like it. And I've also done some previous research with other performance type mouthpieces. So they asked, would I be willing to design some study to test the product? And what we ultimately did was essentially a repeat of that previous study with the mouthpiece and clenching as an additional condition, right? So swing athletes, this time we recruited baseball and softball athletes. So we had a mixed gender design, clenching, jaw relaxed, mouthpiece without clenching, and then mouthpiece clenching. So we had 4 different conditions. Again, clenching the jaw led to greater performance in bat swing velocity over non-clenching, also by about that 3 mile per hour difference. But the interesting thing is when we clenched with the mouthpiece, we saw an extra benefit from that. So yes, it was enhanced over non-clenching, but another mile per hour or so, right? So statistically, that clenching with the mouthpiece was not different than clenching alone, but it was greater in terms of the actual average velocity of the group. So it seems like if you have something to clench against, as opposed to just clenching against your own teeth or activating, your jaw musculature without something to bite down on, it seems to have a little bit of an added benefit there.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting too, of having that mouthpiece in. It takes it even a step further than just clenching alone. And so I guess in talking about that and how it led to almost about a 6% increase in bat speed, what do you think exactly was behind this improvement with having the AIRWAAV in specifically?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think the literature is very clear on what mechanisms are behind, the concurrent activation potentiation phenomenon. There are multiple things that have been postulated, but it's really hard. There's no way for us to clearly identify that. So we know this thing's happening, but we can't really explain exactly what's going on inside the body that makes this occur. So that's why I call it a phenomenon, right? We can't really fully explain it. We have ideas about what it might be. When you add the mouthpiece to that, I've seen various proposals around why a performance mouthpiece might lead to performance enhancement. Some of them are relating to alignment of the temporomandibular joint, so the jaw alignment. Anyone who has TMJ disorder knows that symptoms of having a malaligned jaw are pretty significant, right? So there's headaches, there's dizziness, there's nausea, there's lots of things that can go on there. And people who are trained to create dental orthodontics to align the jaw or bring it into more alignment, they can really help people who have TMJ disorder in dealing with those symptoms. And the idea there is there has to be some sort of optimal jaw position that allows for, not only the absence of symptoms of things like pain and dizziness, but for optimal performance as well. So there's stuff out there on jaw alignment. But for me, I personally think it's more of having the mouthpiece in and biting down on the mouthpiece is further facilitating that concurrent activation potentiation, right? It allows you to clench harder. And there is pretty clear evidence that the more you can activate those remote muscles, the greater the potential benefit achieved through concurrent activation potentiation. So a lot of people have sensitive teeth. They, are unable to generate as much force biting down when the jaw is completely closed versus when there's something in between the teeth that keeps the jaw in this more, again, potentially aligned position. But it just facilitates the clench, I think. I think personally that's my thought on how this is beneficial.
Yeah. And you've touched on it a lot in different ways, but how would you say that AIRWAAV plays a role in CAP, and why do you think it specifically led to this boost in bat speed during the study that you created?
Yeah, well, I mean, the design of the mouthpiece is pretty interesting. It's, when most people I think about a mouthpiece, they think, protective, a mouth guard, so to speak, that aligns and fits to the upper teeth. The AIRWAAV fits to the bottom teeth, and it has a unique feature. And again, I'm not exactly sure what you would call them, but I call them bite plates. So it's
Yes.
the surfaces over the molar teeth that, again, keep the teeth from being in touch with each other. So there's an element of jaw alignment there. But again, having that hard surface to clench down on and bite against, to me, that's what helps, right? It's allowing you to clench harder or generate more force or activate those muscles to a greater degree than if you're just biting against your own teeth or, biting against some soft surface, chewing gum or something like that, right? Which is a pretty practical thing. A lot of people chew gum, but I don't think that's enough to create this advantage.
Yeah. With all of your baseball and softball athletes that were involved in the study, did they feel any difference while using the mouthpiece, or was the improvement more of a behind the scenes neurological benefit?
Yeah, we asked that question. We asked them, so first of all, a lot of baseball and softball athletes don't naturally wear mouthpieces. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
sport where that's a requirement. So it was a little bit novel to them. So in order to allow them to become more comfortable wearing the mouthpiece and uh, understand exactly what we wanted from them, we fitted them with it and we allowed them to wear it for a couple of weeks prior to doing our data collection. And we asked them to wear it for every practice activity that they had, their sport specific practice in the fall, as well as their strength conditioning sessions as well. And we asked them, keep this in, clench on it, make sure it feels okay it doesn't rub anywhere or anything like that. And we had no complaints at all about the fit, which was great. And we asked them after data collection, did you feel like you were able to swing better, harder, under any condition? And some of them indicated that, I don't clench. I know I'm not a clencher. I'm not a person that does that. So being asked to do this,
A
you know,
little weird.
yeah, it was strange to them. So they weren't as happy about it. But again, I'm trying to think back of, I may be wrong here because I don't have the numbers directly in front of me, but of the 14 participants that we had in our most recent study, I think there were 12 or 13 that had a benefit from clenching with a mouthpiece. So even though
That's
they
a big
may have,
number.
yeah, I mean, there's the idea of responders and non-responders has been out there in the literature. Yes, this helps some people. Maybe it doesn't help other people. Maybe if you're a natural clincher versus someone who doesn't do that. But it does seem to be beneficial for the majority of people,
Yeah.
even if they don't feel like it's something that feels natural to them. And so that would be part of it, right? If it's a strategy of performance enhancement that you plan to implement, then let's wear the mouthpiece, let's practice clinching, and let's do that in settings where we're in the cage, where we're on the field, where we're in the weight room, so that when it comes time to perform in a game, it's second nature. You're used to having the mouthpiece in, you're used to clinching when you're exerting force. So to me, that's a simple fix to address that potential issue.
Yeah. And with that, looking beyond baseball and softball athletes, how do you see the principles of CAP and using a tool like the AIRWAAV mouthpiece translating into other sports?
Yeah, well, I mean, we only did bat swing velocity. I see
Mm-hmm.
utility of it in baseball for pitchers as well, and I think there's probably already pitchers who are wearing the AIRWAAV mouthpiece. In fact, I know that there are at various levels. We've seen images of it. Even if you've been watching ESPN, you may not have realized what you've seen, but it's there. So I again, biting down as you're exerting that force to throw the ball, I think that's beneficial. Certainly, I think it translates pretty well to similar sports, tennis, golf, lacrosse, things of that nature, where there's these bursts of maximal effort or high velocity movements that occur. Again, the timing of the clinch is important, not so much related to the mouthpiece, but you have to time the contraction of the remote musculature to essentially be simultaneous with the activity that you're doing. If you start the clinch too early, the benefits can dissipate a little bit. And if you wait too late, the benefits are not there. So the timing is important. So again, I think practicing utilizing the strategy of clinching and clinching against the mouthpiece is necessary, unless you're just a natural at it, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
one of those people. I bite down every time I'm doing something of maximal or near maximal physical exertion. I'm creating the ugliest face just by contracting the muscles and biting down. So it's a pretty natural thing for me, but for those who
Me too.
aren't, yeah, um, for those who aren't, it's just a matter of practicing it if you want to implement this as a strategy.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is very common in weightlifting and that we see across the board on big stages like powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, whatever that is. So for strength sports with those type of things and even CrossFit, could CAP enhance performance during those heavy lifts or explosive movements like you're talking about? And what might that look like in practicing that?
Yeah, I believe there's potential for that. Believe it or not, I think the sport of weightlifting is already doing this. I believe the sport of powerlifting is already doing this. I mean, for years, powerlifters have worn protective mouthpieces because they bite down so hard. Those athletes have chipped teeth simply from clenching their jaw so hard under those maximal effort, 1RM assessments and performance. So those guys wear protective mouth guards. So yeah, I think there's benefit to that already. On the Olympic lifting side, interestingly enough, I think a lot of those folks are doing it without realizing. There's a lot of Olympic weightlifters who actually open the jaw maximally
Mm-hmm.
prior to executing the lift. So whether they realize it or not, they're still activating muscles of the jaw, which is a remote voluntary contraction. So they probably are, getting some benefit of CAP for that. Now, whether that's better than clenching against a mouthpiece, I don't know. That hasn't actually been tested or put out there in the literature just yet. So
Yeah.
um, that would be an interesting study to me, right? To see if one type of remote voluntary contraction is better than another, right? What we have seen in the literature is that if you're able to activate multiple muscle groups that are remote, right? So there was a study done where squat performance and squat jump performance was tested with and without CAP, and the contractions utilized were jaw clenching and squeezing your hands on the barbell. So the barbell's on the shoulders, squeezing the barbell, as well as pulling the barbell into the shoulders. So you're activating all this muscle, creating a lot more tension in the body for muscles that aren't necessarily facilitating the movement.
Mm-hmm.
And what they saw is that when you activated multiple muscle groups remotely, the benefit of CAP was greater than if you simply clenched the jaw and did nothing else, right? So if you can aggregate your remote voluntary contractions, there seems to be a benefit to that. Again, that might be feasible for some sports and some athletes, but not others. But I would love to kind of test different types of remote voluntary contractions. Clenching the jaw versus opening the jaw. Is one better than the other? Does one lead to better performance outcomes? And then the real piece that's missing here that I've been hesitant to do is a training study, right? A long-term benefit. Is there a difference in a training outcome if we train for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and we're clenching every rep of our training session versus not, right? Does that little bit of benefit that we get each repetition, does that add up to greater gains in outcomes over time?
That would be interesting to know.
Yeah, we're not really well equipped to do that here where I'm at. We're a teaching institution primarily. So certainly we're involved in research, and I'm happy about that. But our primary goal is to be good classroom instructors. So there's just not as much time for doing research as if we were at a big school that's an R1 institution where you have grad assistants to help and oversee the lab and kind of be in charge of these studies. So,
yeah. How about sports like sprinting and track and field? Because you did touch some on the timing of clenching, but then also the impact that AIRWAAV could have with more power output and explosiveness.
Yeah, I'm unsure about that. I haven't seen really any evidence of cyclical benefit. So when I think about track and field and sprinting, the running gait is a cyclical movement pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that has been done or that I've seen have kind of been these big single effort events, swinging a bat, jumping, isometric force production for a short period of time. Repeated cycling of muscle contractions like we see in a running gait. There's nothing that's been done on that. Is there potential? Perhaps. I just don't know the answer to that.
Where do you see the future of CAP research heading in? You had talked about maybe about the long-term benefits of it, but are there any certain aspects of performance enhancements that you are particularly excited to explore?
I really don't know. I kind of think the next step has to be a training study, right? Like, yes, it's a beneficial strategy from an acute perspective. I think when the timing of your remote voluntary contraction is timed correctly, when the event or the activity is an appropriate, there's benefit, right? I think the literature is fairly clear on that. Again, there are studies out there that have shown no benefit. I think some methodological differences can be is explanation for that. I don't know. I really think the next stage is a training study to see, is this something that would be worth implementing in a weight room setting, right? With a team, with a whole group of athletes to say, hey, not only are we going to perform these lifts and move these loads at this velocity and so on and so forth, we're going to do some remote contractions while we do that, because that's going to enhance our velocity of movement, our rate of force development, and several other force characteristics that have been shown to be beneficial. I really think that's probably, if it goes anywhere else, I think that's where it's going to go.
Well, if you do get the opportunity to research that, I would love to hear the results, because I haven't even thought about that long-term effects. If obviously when you're training in general, of any type of percentage that you can get just a little bit better, obviously that adds up over time. And if you can use a mouthpiece and clench down more and it can take you even further, I think that'd be very interesting to learn. So
Yeah, I agree. It would certainly be interesting. So yeah, if I get that opportunity, I will definitely be communicating with everyone that's a part of your organization for sure.
well, I have one last question, and that is going to be for athletes or coaches listening today. What advice would you give them if they're interested in applying the concept of CAP that you've been talking about and trying out the AIRWAAV mouthpiece?
Yeah, I certainly think, again, if you're a sport or in a sport, or you're an athlete that performs the type of activities that we're talking about, right? These high force or explosive type movements, to me, it's worth giving it a shot, right? I'm a scientist, so I would say test it and measure, right? Set up a practice session where you've got a mouthpiece. Again, they're super simple and easy to fit to the teeth. The directions that the company provides is they are very clear. There's no way really to mess it up. So get a mouthpiece, try it, put it in, clench on it. Most people today have some way. There are smartphone apps that allow you to measure, bat swing velocity. There's some super simple devices that are on the market that you can attach to the knob of a bat that'll allow you to measure that. So measure it, right? Are you swinging faster when this thing, and not just one swing, right? Repeat the session multiple times. Clench, don't clench. Wear the mouthpiece, don't wear the mouthpiece. What does the average overall velocity look like? And if on average you're performing better, yeah, to me, why would you not take advantage of that, right? The reason why I guess I'm so passionate about this is because as an athlete, I was marginal at best, right? I wasn't born with all the talent, but I had no problem working hard. So any way that I could find an advantage, a competitive advantage, something like clenching the jaw would help me with that, or wearing a mouthpiece would help me with that, I was 100% on board with trying that strategy. So I guess that's where I'm coming from. That's where my motivation is. Perhaps that puts me in a little bit of a bias perspective, but as a researcher, we try to be as unbiased as possible. And I think at least my work and the work of those who've done some stuff with CAP before me, it pretty clearly demonstrates the benefits of it.
Yeah. And you can't exactly ignore if there's a product in front of you that is beneficial from the research that you've done and personal experience as well.
Indeed.
Well, that's kind of all I have for us today. Thank you for jumping on with me and sharing more about the research that you've done. I thought it was very interesting to hear one from your presentation that you did, and also just answering all the questions that I had for you. So thank you for making time out of your busy schedule.
Well, thank you for having me. This was my first podcast experience.
It was great.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I didn't mess up too bad.
No, you did great.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great weekend.
You as well.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's all for today's episode of On the Air. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Dr. Allen, for joining me. Be sure to stay tuned for our next episode, and don't forget to purchase your own AIRWAAV mouthpiece if you want to break your best and unlock your full athletic potential. If you have made it this far, be sure to use code OTA15 for 15% off your next purchase. Drop any questions that you have about AIRWAAV in the comments below, and see you next time.